Welcome, everyone, to DLT's very first DevSecOps Secure Software Factory podcast series, episode 1. I am Jim Fitzmaurice. I am the Senior Sales Manager for the Application Lifecycle domain, as well as the DevSecOps practice that we have stood up over the last year here at DLT. A few things I wanted to point out, why we had done this podcast series and starting with episode 1, where we're going to focus on the DLT Secure Software Factory. This Secure Software Factory fills a unique hole as an aggregator and offering the capability to bring together a framework of tools that both system integrators and organizations and agencies in the federal government can easily consume. Future episodes, we will take the time to spotlight the different technology companies that make up the Secure Software Factory and discuss the role they play in the SDLC and how they can specifically help agencies achieve mission-critical success towards their journeys to DevSecOps. Our intention is to have this become a resource for people within the public sector space to consume and utilize as a tool best practices for your SDLC. With that being said, I'd like to take time to introduce our other speakers on this very first podcast, episode 1. David?
Great. Thanks, Jim. My name is David Blankenhorn. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at DLT. As a leader of the Office of the CTO, we're really focused on, it's interesting, we sit at the crossroads between industry and the market. So what that means is we get to see all the cool stuff that's being innovated in the industry, the new vendors, the new products, but we're also highly attuned to what's happening within the public sector, understanding the requirements, where things are going. So really what the Office of CTO does is we actually help really accelerate public sector adoption of technologies and technology companies' products. So that's really what we focus on. And as part of the Octo, we're really looking to help really educate the market, educate the industry, what the government needs, and also educate our partners around how to actually address the market and go to market. So that's really what I do and what my team does. And I think, Rick?
Thanks, David. My name is Rick Stewart. I am the Chief Software Technologist, and as David explained, DLT offers a wide range of technologies. And my focus on how those technologies aid and assist public sector agencies to develop software in a more efficient and secure manner. So I look across the DLT portfolio, regardless of where an agency's maturity level is in terms of their software development. And I try to advise them and provide thought leadership as to where the industry is going and how DLT can assist them in terms of technology. In assisting me with this vast technology challenge is Mike Fitzurka, who works in our engineering department. So, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Fitzurka, introducing myself. The sales engineer for the group, which means that I have the technical and practical understanding of these products, how they work together, and I'm responsible for demos, workshops, and most recently, podcast production.
So you're being modest, Mike. I mean, at the end of the day, you're the one that keeps Rick and I honest. And that's the important thing.
Thank you.
David and I don't do.
And that's
we just
right. We leave people like you to do.
I'm the one who has to do what they say. So.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the introductions. So, everyone, I'd like to ask David Blankenhorn here, our very first topic of conversation. David, could you explain DLT's approach to this tech domain strategy?
Sure. So, DLT takes a tech domain approach for a number of reasons. But currently, we actually have 6 tech domains that we go to market with. It's cloud computing, cybersecurity, big data analytics, business applications, IT infrastructure and management, and application lifecycle. And the reason why we take this tech domain approach is really for 3 primary reasons. Number 1 is around the community of practice and the language that they speak. So if we look at each of these tech domains, each of these groups actually have their own community of practice that are there. You talk to a bunch of cybersecurity folks. That's their role. They have their own language. They talk about things like FISMA and POAM and controls. So they have a very unique language. And so by orienting around these tech domains, we always look at the community of practice, and we also look at the language that they speak, because that's going to tailor how we educate, how we inform, and how we actually communicate with those groups. The second attribute is really around their technical function and really how the industry self-defines itself, how it really defines who they are. So again, we look at these technology domains, they align to really kind of these big functional technical capabilities. I mean, cybersecurity is a massive portfolio of capabilities, but it also kind of falls underneath that cybersecurity rubric. So that's really kind of with the second orientation. The first one is around the market. The second one is really around the industry. And the third one is really around how procurement takes place. Because again, we're looking to really accelerate the adoption of these technologies and enable government to be more effective in their mission. So we really look at how these things are procured. And quite often, each of these tech domains are procured in a different manner under different kinds of contracts. Now, today we're going to be talking about the application lifecycle domain. And to that point, I want to just point out is we've been very much in lockstep with the evolution of this domain over the last few years. If we look at where the market's going today, we have folks like Ron Ross, who after 17 years of shepherding the Federal Information Security Modernization Act implementation, in leading all of NIST's efforts around the development of that and just really evangelizing and shepherding that, he is now officially moving over to really lead up on the same kind of effort as it relates to DevSecOps. So this is a huge turning point in terms of how the government's thinking. We're starting to see them adopting more agile methods. There's still a lot of waterfall out there, but we're starting to see some accelerated waterfall. We're starting to see some agile. We're starting to see that more DevSecOps definitely taking hold throughout government, both on Civ's side as well as on the DoD, like with Kessel Run or Level Up or some of those sorts of huge initiatives. So we've been really tracking this and monitoring and supporting this for a number of years now. And I'm excited that we're kind of taking this to the next step with the application lifecycle, the evolution of that portfolio, and ultimately one of the first instantiations of an architecture in support of this, which is a secure software factory.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that real quick, David. It's funny what you had just mentioned is, Rick and I, at one point last year when we were at a conference, it's an analogy I often use, when we're having meetings with agencies and partners, and it's very fitting, is probably the best analogy that we have heard is, DevSecOps is what Agile was to the public sector space 6 or 7 years ago, right? It's becoming that relevant and that important and top of mind for a lot of executives.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at that development further is that, ultimately, DevSecOps is, as we all know, it's about people, it's about processes, and it's about automation, the tooling. And, any one of these isn't going to work. So if we look at, we're starting to see culturally, we're starting to see the people start to orient. We're starting to see projects and programs standing up in support of this culturally. We're starting to see people getting the skills. And now we're starting to see folks looking at tool chains that can actually make this all a reality and actually add the speed to it as well. But yeah, we're definitely seeing the trend there, Jim. So Rick and Mike, at this point, I'd like to kind of flip this over to you two. Take a moment to expand on DLT's application lifecycle tech domain and how the Secure Software Factory actually fits into that.
Sure, David, thanks. It's important to realize that the application lifecycle domain is it's very vast. Without getting in specifics of DevSecOps immediately, a broad range across the public sector is at different evolutionary stages in their application development. So you might even have agencies that are still much into the mainframe software development, which has a separate practice or life cycle in and of itself. And culturally, they're still segmented with their departmentalization and compartmentalization of activities. You have developers not talking to QA testers. not talking to operations people, not talking to network people. So a lot of it's done through request and ordering, et cetera. And a life cycle to get an application out might be 6, 8, 9 months to get an application started. So we still have to consider that from a DLT perspective as a domain.
Just get the application started.
Yes, correct.
And
the life cycle in and of itself is much, much longer before you even see it actually manifest itself maybe in a test environment. Could be a year and a year and a half. So we have to recognize that fact, but we also recognize the fact that they're evolving. They're looking at the private sector, the public sector, look at the private sector and seeing all the results with efficiency, automation, velocity, et cetera. And they're trying to adopt the practice. As I think Jim and David mentioned before, the adoption of Agile is still coming into focus for them. And that Agile evolution is causing ripples throughout these more legacy-driven domains or agencies. And it's causing consternation and forcing the evolution into a DevOps and DevSecOps domain. So DLT is looking at the wide range, looking at the worst case scenario where you have mainframe development and very siloed approaches, but we're also looking forward into where agencies want to go, which is kind of the manifestation of the secure software factory, because it's a combination of all skill sets and all collaboration across anybody, stakeholders within that domain, and coming together in an orderly fashion and applying technology that will allow them to do it faster and more efficiently. So Mike, I want you expand on that notion of this funneled approach of worst case scenario of a very staggered, very formal approach to application lifecycle development into a more agile and sprint or iteration oriented approach to DevOps or DevSecOps.
Sure. I think one thing that we need to kind of clarify with the factory is that it's not a one-size-fits-all product. It's a collection of products, and more so, it's a sort of a reference architecture that you're looking at. We looked at all of the components that are necessary in building software and doing it in a modern way, but we also realize that everyone is where they are in their journey, that some of them are in the beginning stages, or someone's still rooted in waterfall. Someone, maybe they're already doing microservices and they're trying to get those up and running. So what we wanted to do was put together the collection of tools that you can use. But you also know that every developer out there has their pet tool, their pet IDE, the thing that they're productive with and they can't live without. And I didn't want us to change any of that. That really the factory is an idea of let's handle these other cases that perhaps your factory or your technology or your methodology is not handling right now or hasn't addressed yet. And let's be interchangeable so that, if you have this one tool that you cannot live without, I'm not going to come in there and say, rip that tool away from you. That's not going to be successful in any state. But you do want to make an advancement. You want to take yourself from a waterfall approach and move forward to do things faster. And that's part of what our factory kind of supports. And there was a promise in Agile management and in microservices even that you get to use your own tools, that you get to your team gets to decide what IDE that they're productive in. They get to choose what language that they're best in. And so we also pick tools that try to cover the most area. Like we pick scanners that cover the most languages, so that offer the support where we need to, where we suggest that you need. But give you that ability to swap things out, because I'm not about taking choice away from anyone.
I think what's interesting is when this whole initiative started, you guys were given a blank canvas. It said, okay, based on your very rich and deep developer backgrounds, what would your tool chain look like? If you could go out and pick all this cool tech from industry, what would your modern tool chain look like based on these modern methodologies for software development? So literally you came out with a blank canvas and say, okay, this is how I would want to do this myself. But you guys also had some like big rules in mind around, okay, well, they've got to have APIs that can integrate with other things. It's got to be modular. If you want to rip and replace a certain part, the customers can do that. The end user can do that. I think that you also said that it had to be portable. It had to be both on-prem or cloud-based. It had to be able to work in either environment. Mm-hmm. So you guys had some big rules to really make sure that customers actually maintained agency. They had control over the pieces they wanted. They could pick and choose to build out their ideal tool chain, just as you had that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's always an ear to the ground with disruptive technologies. I think to Mike's point and to your point, David, it's very important that we're constantly leaning forward to see what's out there in the market, looking at the canvas to not where the puck is right now, but where it's going, where it needs to be. And without being dictatorial to agencies, we're trying to be consultative and lead them to the proper path. But again, agencies are at different maturity levels, and you can't go in there with a broad brush and start sweeping because you're trying to move a culture along with the technology. And if one leads the other, there's going to be disappointment.
Yep, agreed. Now, Jim, I want to flip this over to you for a moment here and talk a little bit about the compelling business reasons for developing the Secure Software Factory. Talk a little bit about kind of the blank slate from a technical perspective. What were the business drivers for you all tackling this?
Yeah, and it's a question, we get asked often, right? Is, hey, this is great. Why did you do it, right? And you guys kind of hinted at a few of the reasons here in the last several minutes here. But, there was a handful of reasons when, we first started this as a, back of a napkin idea concept in late 2018 was, number one, there was nothing like this in our space, right? We wanted to create something unique, but something that had a lot of value to both the channel, but also to the public sector, organizations and agencies. And really, there was a few paradigm shifts that both Rick and myself early on saw within the government space that, we said, hey, we need to make sure that we're on the front side of that wave, right? And that we're riding that, not playing catch up. And one of those was, the government's paradigm shift towards DevSecOps, right? As we talked about, it is the new norm for a lot of agencies that are adopting. It's top of mind for a lot of executives as you're looking at, plans for this fiscal year, but also for the next 2-3 fiscal years, that it's a main priority for a lot of agencies. Also, we looked at when we first started to build this out, Nick Shalin in the Air Force and his Platform One, that large initiative, they are fostering probably the biggest DevSecOps, evangelizing right now in the federal government with what Nick and his team have been doing. And when we compared our reference architecture to his 80+ page reference architecture, we noticed there was a lot of similarities with what we had compiled on our end. So there was that paradigm shift. There was also, another paradigm shift that we saw was this bundled solution, this factory approach from a procurement standpoint. And, really when you pull back the layers there, there is a massive cost savings from the government. Instead of doing the normal historical one-off procurement for a specific software tool, if all of a sudden you're seeing these procurements where there's 4 tools or there's 8 tools or there's 12 tools, instead of doing those one-off procurements, when you just compound the time and energy, there's a significant cost savings from the federal government that is very relevant and top of mind for those folks on that procurement side. So, those were the 2 big paradigm shifts that we saw immediately when we first kicked this off as to, hey, we really need to get in alignment with this. There was also 3 or 4 other bullet points that, as we, started to napkin this out was, looking at, providing that unique approach in terms of aggregation, distributorship, and really how do we differentiate from our competition? Rick and I have heard a lot of really good things from both SIs, value-added resellers, and agencies, SLED organizations that, the feedback to Rick's point earlier about that more prescriptive approach to coming at them in terms of the conversation is more about identifying where they are having challenges within their SDLC and how this framework of tools is very relevant to them. The feedback has been overwhelming, from all those various entities. We also looked at, when we build this out, throughout the various swim lanes that play a part in the SDLC, we looked at both the Magic Quadrant and with Gartner. We looked at the Forrester reports. We wanted to make sure that when we were building this out and evangelizing this, that the tools that were within the factory are that best of breed approach. They are their champions within both of those Gartner and Forrester areas. And you had mentioned earlier in that last discussion, integration, right? Integration is key when you are building something like this, a framework, a reference architecture, whatever you want to call it. When we're able to sit across from these organizations, agencies, and partners and have that conversation to say, hey, a lot of these tools already have integrations in place. Now, I'm not going to simplify actually building it out and making it work. That's an entirely different podcast episode. But, a lot of these OEMs within our factory have existing integrations. You see the relief when you have that conversation to the end customers that, there's a level of, you're checking some boxes and there's reprieve there and comfort knowing that is there. And then the last thing, and I think it was Mike that kind of mentioned this in that last segment is, when we built this, we wanted to take into account that we're not saying, hey, it's either all or none with our software factory. This is very much a plug and play approach, right? When we are having these very important conversations, we are talking about, hey, where are you having challenges within your SDLC? Is it testing? Is it CI/CD? Is it, in your planning stages, right? And as we peel back those layers within those conversations, we are able to prescribe, hey, whether it's maybe 6 of the 10 or 11 technologies in our software factory, or maybe it's just 2 or 3 that we are able to say, hey guys, these are the areas that are mission critical that we can have an immediate impact from these technologies to help solve your problem areas in the very near future. And that's where we see the most success coming from the software factory, is having those more prescriptive approaches within those early conversations with those organizations.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
I think it's also important to note that the agencies themselves are recognizing that when you have legacy software, these old applications, they're actually opening up a security risk for them. So it's important for us to communicate with them, and for us to communicate that they're exposing risk to their applications. So there is a larger total cost of ownership that they may or may not be aware of, that we think that we can come in and give them a shining light of, here, there's hope on the horizon. Here is a model, a framework that you can move to that will not only accomplish your ability to get changes out into your community faster, but we can also do it in a secure, thoughtful manner. And as Jim says, we don't hit them over the head with a pipe saying, you've got to take it all. We can do this in very appropriate stages and wean them into a framework that is more aligned with their mission goals. Having the ability, in my previous role with the DLT, I've done a lot of workshops, and there are a lot of technicians in the federal government, whether they're assigned to an agency or a contractor, that are thirsting for options. They are aware of certain technologies, but as Jim said, they may not be aware of the existing integrations that are already available to them. And when they're not aware, they're just left with a plethora of technology choices that they have to go get a cost-benefit analysis about how to move them into their agencies. We're trying to bring that forward, at least with a semi-prescriptive fashion with the Secure Software Factory, so that gives them options that they can look at. And again, if they don't like a technology or they invested in a different technology that accomplishes the same goal, fine. We're just giving them a pathway to enable them to achieve their mission faster.
So it's a quick question, if I may, Rick. You touched on a point about legacy code, the legacy application. Yes. So is it fair to say that even if I'm an agency, I've got this legacy code out there, assuming I have the code, there's nothing preventing me from bringing this into a more modern methodology or tool chain, is there?
Well, I think there are there's variants. There's variants of applications that may not lend themselves to like containerization right off the bat or running on a Kubernetes environment. But they certainly can take advantage of static code analysis, automated testing, those particular capabilities that can be brought in without running on the Secure Software Factory. It's disjointed, but available to them. Now, the important thing is we're looking at it holistically, where we can engage with our technical providers that have programs that can modernize your environment. So they come in with a software inventory, so to speak, an assessment of where you are with your inventory of applications, and they can compartmentalize those applications into this needs a total refactoring. This can be moved into a container relatively quickly, and there's a middle ground where this might take a series of refactoring over a course of time. But they can help a public sector agency evolve and make it in a more a planned fashion instead of a slingshot right into a modernization.
Okay.
That's probably not realistic, but again, the goal is downfield, and we can take you there 10 yards at a time.
Gotcha. Jim, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, and Rick, you mentioned it, the automated testing piece, right? It's something you and I have seen since we started building this whole concept out was, and we've seen multiple panelists, right? And in some cases, the same speaker from some of these agencies down in DC talking about, the automated testing piece, right? That's an area in a lot of other software factories that we've seen that are out there in the market. Automated testing is really not addressed, right? And, I always hark back to, there's one panelist we've seen multiple times, he brings this up every time he speaks, is to say, there is no DevSecOps without the automated testing piece, right? It's the black box of the SDLC. And that's a key area and component within, the DLT Secure Software Factory that we've identified, some very good technologies that can do a lot of very good things for these agencies to help within, standing up their own DevSecOps practice.
Yeah, and I agree, Jim, because automation is key to the evolution process. And so an agency, we help guide them to where they're having manual testing, for example, or manual interventions. And we're trying to introduce technologies to get rid of that manual labor. It's not to remove jobs. It's not to remove positions. It's to make them more effective so they can divert their intellect into much more productive uses within their agency, as opposed to replacing them with automation. It's a combination of how we make their position, their jobs, more effective and more useful.
Well said.
Right.
I'm loving what I'm hearing, guys. This is really good stuff. So, Rick and Mike, let me ask you guys, and I'll start with you, Rick. What were the guiding technical principles for creating the Secure Software Factory?
A good question. I think we were touching upon the high-level bits of why we came up with this secure software factory. I think one of the guiding principles is our existing relationship with our technology providers that provide perhaps a subset or a large subset of what's actually needed when you're taking a step back, as David mentioned before, with creating software, customized software, or even embellishing on an existing software package or customizing it to an agency's needs. So when you're looking at software development, you can't get away from these stages that are represented in the diagram, where you have to plan, you have to gather requirements, you have to figure out what you're doing. You have to develop it with a mindset of having lots of different choices of either languages or frameworks or what you're actually trying to achieve. You build it in a enterprise scale metaphor. So you have to have enough resources in order to build on a wide range. And as we're moving into modernization techniques, you're looking at building your software and deploying them in containers. Containers are a very portable construct that allows you to move your workloads from whether it be on-prem, on bare metal, or across a wide variety of infrastructure, so that you can use your resources more wisely, more efficiently, and you can focus on separation of concerns with developers developing in the language and accomplishing their task as they see fit, but also given the operational IT operations, the ability to deploy that in the most appropriate host across that operational set of clusters. So we're looking at modernization in terms of Kubernetes has won the day in terms of the next, let's call it on a very casual scale, next operating system, because it can host these containers at scale, detect when the containers are not responding, and kill and bring up another container of that application very quickly, efficiently, and across a wide range of infrastructure. So we're looking for technology providers that can provide those types of infrastructure and holistic view of what software actually is created from and runs upon when we're looking at helping an agency modernize. We mentioned automated tests before, which we feel is kind of the Rosetta Stone of a DevOps or DevSecOps process, because automated testing could either help you or hinder you if you have to inject manual interventions or repeated steps that could be prone to human error and stop your movement of your application as it proceeds from the development stage into a testing phase, into maybe a staging phase, UAT, et cetera, ultimately down into production. We also looked at factors that the production environments across the public sector could be varied. Since we deal with a lot with the DoD or with other agencies that have secured production environments, we have to look at release management in a way that allows us to have not only just one production environment that you're moving or migrating a variant of an application into. It could be a very disparate or disjointed set of production environments that you're deploying to over time. So it's important to maintain the relationship of a release when there are other dependencies about that application, either a database or another application dependency, which we're trying to move away from, but it exists. So you have to be mindful of release management when you're looking at an enterprise scale. And deployment and release go hand in hand, but we're looking for deployment mechanisms that have a wide range of deployment strategies that allow an organization on a application basis to deploy based on what that application's needs are, dependencies are, and be mindful of it and provide automation to allow that to happen most efficiently. And of course, you want an operating environment that is flexible, that is resilient, especially scalable and elastic. With the moving from virtual machines, which are a great technology movement, into containerization opens up a wide variety of options that allow application workloads to be moved across a wide range of operational performing infrastructure. And then you have to monitor your environments, regardless of where they are, whether it's pre-prod or production, and have the same type of tooling and technologies that's flexible enough to allow you to see how your workload is performing, whether it's performing based on responsiveness to its stakeholders, but also is it at a level that is secure, and when these vulnerabilities are detected, you have a mechanism that provides feedback loops back to the development team to rectify those workloads. Because really the essence of DevOps or DevSecOps is to use best practices to treat the root cause of your application deficiency back at the place where the most onus is, and that's at the development stage. So when you hear about this notion of shift left, the Secure Software Factory supports all these notions of moving these technologies further back into development stage and give developers the tools of self-service to allow them to quickly remedy any vulnerabilities from a security standpoint, but also from a functional standpoint to ensure that these workloads are not only secure, but they meet the requirements. And any changes that happen along the way can be quickly identified and remedied across the application lifecycle. So what DLT has done with the Secure Software Factory is we have injected these technology providers into this software development lifecycle in a modern way, using containers as a de facto standard and Kubernetes as a infrastructure layer that allows you to move these workloads across their lifecycle very quickly and efficiently. Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I have a couple of kind of looking at the sort of the technical principles of what was I having envisioned, at the time. Again, I wanted to put the choices back to the development team, allow them to be polyglot, allow them to have their own tools. I'm a big proponent of open source. That I think that's where the innovation comes from, but I'm also a proponent of supported open source. So I wanted to make sure that you had supported tools that were hardened from a security point of view. A continuous everything, we've kind of hit on that, but that your continuous integration, continuous development, continuous deployment, continuous monitoring, continuous testing, yada, yada. And the only way you can do all of that is with a heavy sense of automation, that you're automating everything as you do along the way, that you're storing infrastructure as code, that you're tracking everything that you deployed, that you can redeploy it again in an instant. You mentioned shifting left. I think also with shifting left is that a good clarification from my developer point of view is that it's not being shifted to the developer, but it is rather shifted to the development phase, so that operations is still involved in the development phase, and that they're automating, and that we're working, jointly in the same team. That's the whole agile mindset. But also in that shifting left is that any tool that's going to evaluate my application or the changes that I'm making in the development phase, if you're going to test it later down the pipeline, I, in that phase, should have access to those same tools, to those same tests. So if you're going to shift the responsibility left, you have to shift the capabilities left as well, and give me the full capability to create my own environment, which you can do with containers, and give me the ability to test those environments in the exact same way that you're going to do all the way even into production. So that's a full shift of left. And so those...
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, Mike. That's excellent points. And in the public sector, that cultural shift has to be done very carefully because, given a developer visibility into a production environment and logs and everything, it's kind of an anti-pattern where it exists right now. So we're trying to introduce technology providers that do that in a secure fashion that allows those teams to work together. And the separation of concerns is still respected, but also the ability for the people with the best insight into the workload have visibility into it.
Right, and I'm not saying that you have to give them access to production. I just want access to every test that would be done before you get into production. So if I...
Agreed.
Maybe the caveat of a destructive performance test, I don't want to be running that every time I check a minor code change in. But if I need to be able to do that to ensure that this is production ready, I should be able to do that well before I get to that, where everyone else is now waiting because I didn't do the right job. I need to be able to do my job further left. That's all.
Agreed.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
Jim, I was just going to say, that's the technical
Mike,
things. Yeah.
You mentioned capabilities.
Sure.
That segues perfectly into, kind of the next area of discussion. So, Rick, I'll start with you. What capabilities in the SDLC does the Secure Software Factory support?
Well, if we're looking at capabilities across the SDLC, as previously mentioned, we're looking at taking a step back, and as David mentioned earlier in the podcast, we had to take a step back and we had a blank canvas as how would we, if given our druthers, put together a framework of technology providers and put them into a modern framework that allows us to produce software securely and of high quality. So looking at that, we take a look at our landscape of public sector agencies, and for the most part, we're talking about air-gapped environments, very protected environments, etc. So the least common denominator we took into account that, given their perspective constraints or governance factors, what kind of technology capabilities would we have to provide? And this is a very high level manifestation of what that series of technologies would look like. You have to recognize that these well-established networks and domains for an agency already exist. So you have to work within their constraints. But we still can provide source code managers that are deployed within the firewall of an agency. So we look for technology providers that can do that capability. Source code management is it's becoming more and more critical to modern frameworks because, as Mike mentioned earlier, you not only put your source code in there, but you put your information, your infrastructure as code, your configuration as code, your testing as code, everything as code should be housed or in a repository that is along with your application. So there's one-stop shopping on how you can not only create your application, but deploy it as well. So source code manager, the choice of the source code manager is critical. You also, from the planning stage, you have to provide a framework that agile developers are more accustomed to. A lot of times in the public sector, there are contracts or awards that happen with, you must produce your software in an agile way. And then the government agency gives them tools that don't operate in an agile fashion. So the developer ends up doing some hybrid of waterfall and agile to the best of their ability. But to truly immerse yourself into the agile framework, there are mindsets and ceremonies and planning activities that are much better suited for an agile project management tool as opposed to a traditional project management tool. You can plan your sprints, you can plan your feedback loops, you can show your stakeholders where you are in any given sprint and what you're planning to deliver after that 1, 2, 3 week sprint, whatever your agency defines. But you have to show that to them in an agile framework. Now, when we get into software development or coding, you're looking at environments that you need to support and build that are very production-like. So you want a developer to work on a task that's in an isolated environment for their workload, that they can do their unit testing, their code quality, their activities with their own database, so they can ensure that their change meets the requirement, meets the task, and using software either from the source code that you're building, but also third-party binaries that you're bringing in, whether it be for your language framework or from open source binaries that you're pulling in to make your application work properly. You have to ensure that the hygiene of those components are clean. So the Secure Software Factory looks for providers that are scanning those third-party binaries and third-party artifacts appropriately, and not only storing them to make subsequent builds faster, but also continuously scanning them to see if a vulnerability is detected after the fact, after it's deployed or somewhere down the promotion chain. And when we're talking about containers, an image registry is very critical for not only the speed of deployment of your workload, but also the capability of scanning that image while it's at rest inside your registry is kind of critical to your software development chain. And speaking of the software development chain, we rely a lot on the development pipelines, your CI/CD pipelines, and even a production pipelines. So it's not one pipeline to rule them all based on the type of customers that we deal in the public sector. It is a series of pipelines that allow your workload to be promoted in the most efficient fashion, giving the developer the tools they need, as Mike said earlier, to see what are the constraints, what are the testing technologies, for example, that would be used so that his or her change can be ensured to be of high quality and secure. And we're also looking at continuous integration pipelines that would promote your workload via an image into an environment that is not only supports a Kubernetes or a container orchestration and management system, but also has a built-in capability to monitor itself. If the platform itself may have a security vulnerability, we want that detected as soon as possible, because the likelihood of that vulnerability is either in production already or about to become in production. We want that identified earlier in the process so that we can incorporate it into a life cycle, not only the workload, but the platform itself. So you have to have these constant security monitoring systems happening in pre-production as well as production. So we can't forget about that. When you're talking about automated testing, we're looking at testing capabilities that span not only just unit testing or functional testing, but support the whole plethora of testing criteria, whether it's static code analysis, whether it's unit testing, whether it's functional testing or API testing. We're looking for providers to span the entire testing lifecycle because nothing hinders progress for an agency than introducing lots of different disparate testing tools and suites and it ends up like the Tower of Babel, where you have lots of different voices coming from your testing scenario, and what you're trying to do is homogenize that testing activity into a more filtered approach, where one testing tool that covers all is a much better solution than a disparate set of unique testing tools. And I mentioned earlier about release management, how that's extremely important. Well, it's extremely important in the public sector, because whether you're not going to have the Netflix, the AWSs, et cetera, where they're producing changes into a production environment, multiple times a day or multiple times a minute, you probably have a more orchestrated or controlled deployment structure that consists of, whether it's CISOs or change control boards, that are going to have to evaluate the controls that you put into place before it's released into production. So the Secure Software Factory also looks at long-term a continuous ATO, or authority to operate capability, and capturing all these test, compliance, governance, et cetera, as they are being produced, so that there's not an activity where you have to compile them at certain 1, 2, 3 week intervals. You're doing that as a course of action, and you're compiling all these controls and test results, et cetera, so that release management eventually becomes an automated function in order to release your application into production quickly and efficiently. And speaking of, when you're into production, you want that ability to test your new version of your application alongside of your old version of your application in a secured fashion, so that you can ensure your new version doesn't represent any kind of defects or software vulnerabilities or security vulnerabilities. So you want to introduce blue-green deployments or A/B testing, et cetera. So the software factory covers these high-level capabilities and concepts, and then we're constantly looking for technology providers that are disruptive, innovative, preferably use open source development models to get the best innovation from the field. But as Mike mentioned earlier, we're also doing this in a risk management framework that allows us to reduce risk, because using pure open source with community supported open source, while it's great for innovation, it sometimes leaves you hanging in terms of support if things go bump in the night and you're trying to release software faster.
Yeah,
Mike,
No, I'll add to that a little, not much, but I think the way we get to what the aspects that we use to really make this happen is automating everything. And we've said that before, and I'll say it again because it does bear repeating, that we put everything into pipelines. We put everything into continuous integration pipelines and continuous deployment pipelines. And we've also picked products that sort of analyze themselves and identify, okay, I did this last time, and here was a bottleneck, or here's a problem. So sort of a sense of continuous improvement on top of all of that. And the only way you can get to these kind of stages is with, and you even mentioned continuous ATO, or pulling documentation together. You can only achieve this through automation. And in terms of agile development, the only thing that matters is the functional points. How can I increase my velocity on getting functional elements added to my application, and how do I do that faster? But you still need to do that, especially in a government, in a very secure way, and to make sure that all along the way you're meeting the guidelines set forth by the government. Therefore, you achieve that through automation, and that's, I think, really kind of the highlight of our factory.
So Jim, we talked a lot about the technical capabilities and the business function of the Secure Software Factory. What does the future hold for the Secure Software Factory, in your opinion?
It's unlimited. You and I on a weekly basis, right? Whether it's a new partner, a new OEM, another agency that's putting something out in terms of, looking for a factory of tools. The feedback since we started this journey has been overwhelming. We always joke, Rick, that, and Mike, on a weekly basis, we get some form of validation in terms of, when we first started this and the direction we're heading in, there is a continual amount of validation that, one, that we've built something very unique here that's relevant to our space, but more so, one of the key tenets in the future is building out this channel strategy, right? And what I mean by that is, Rome wasn't built in a day. So as we are progressing and building this out over the next 3, 6, 12, 18 months, that idea is, especially within our phase 1 demo capability for the software factory is, that we are finding both resellers and SIs that take what we have built and what we're building upon and repurposing, repackaging, and looking at it from a white paper, case study, demos, workshops, webinars, podcasts, right? That we are taking those components and force multiplying that factor of, building out our partner channel network to help evangelize this DLT secure software factory. And then kind of the second phase to that is, we're seeing a massive amount of interest from a OEM standpoint and software company standpoint that is seeing this thought leadership that we are building upon DevSecOps, application lifecycle, and they want a part of this, right? That they're saying, hey, the analogy that we've used before in some of our presentations, Rick, is, we're sitting in a fishing boat and, we're not even having to cast the lines out and the fish are jumping in the boat, right? There's a massive amount of interest that just see this technical wherewithal, technical capability from a DLT perspective that others aren't doing, and they want to be a part of that, right? They see the big picture of what we're building, and it's garnered a lot of interest. And I would even put it out there to the rest of you, David, what do you think in terms of where does this go from here?
Well, I'm pretty excited about it. To your point, there's a lot of OEMs out there that are enthused because we get it. You guys get this. You understand what the market is doing. You understand what the end users are doing, and that's generating a lot of interest there. I think in terms of what we're going to see is if we look at just the evolution of development methodologies over the years, even the last, I would say, 5 years has been a whirlwind of evolution. I mean, it's been almost a revolution, more so than evolution. You look at the Agile, the Kanban, the Scrum, all this swirling around. I don't think the dust has settled yet. I think that we're going to continue to see an evolution. We're going to continue to see a tighter integration between the different functional elements of information technology. It's going to be developer, testing, operations. All those are going to continue to, I think, gel. We're not done yet. And I'm excited about what that future might hold. And I think that we're going to be at the forefront of it, again, because we're at that crossroads. We're right there at the crossroads between the public sector and what they're doing and what the industry is doing. And that's an exciting place to be. And I think you guys have done a great job really building this all out, putting this together into a modular, digestible, rational approach. So I'm excited about this.
I think that's a great point, David. I want to expand on just a little bit and use the metaphor that Jim put forward with the boat. We're swimming out deeper or paddling out deeper and deeper into water, and there are lots of aspects still about software development that we would like to include in the secure software factory. And as the industry matures and gets more comfortable with containerization, you've got container native applications, you've got service meshes, et cetera. You've got new emerging languages that are appropriate for a microservices architecture, microservices in general. So as the public sector becomes more mature and starts bringing and adopting these technologies and frameworks and architectures, we're going to be ahead of them, leading the way and helping them make good choices.
And we're going to need a bigger boat.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
And finally, to add to that, Rick, is, one of the end results too is what we try to drive, every single day here within application lifecycle domain here is, accelerating the public sector book of business for, our clients, right? And part of that channel piece is, as we see these large programmatic opportunities that are in and around DevOps, DevSecOps, that are requesting or looking for a software factory framework of tools, that we are working in conjunction with those channel partners, those SIs, where we have that stable of partners that when something drops in DHS or something drops in the Air Force or in the Navy, that we have that Rolodex of partners that we can immediately lean on and say, hey, we already have this, dictionary of what our thought, our concept, our ebook of the secure software factory is, and we can provide that to them real time and do that plug and play approach where, it's a very seamless, efficient process to formulate a coordinated DLT response in conjunction with our OEM clients, that it's a very relevant conversation and something that I know the technology companies are over the moon to see us as an aggregator helping to drive on their behalf.
I completely agree with everyone's comments. And I think it's important for DLT to distinguish itself in this domain because Mike and I alone probably are over 50, 60 years of software development. And what I think we bring to the table is the practical use and the evolution of where this domain is headed. So instead of just cobbling together technology and say, everybody play nice together, we are actually looking at them, evaluating them, and making sure that we're not making public sector agencies' life miserable by just throwing technology against the wall. We're making it, one of my consultative approaches is make the customer happy with technology choices instead of trying to make a sale. We're trying to help the mission of the customer. And if we keep focused on that, we'll be successful with the secure software factory.
Well said. Well, Mike, did you have anything to add there?
Nope, you guys talked enough.
Perfect. Rick did. Everyone, panelists, speakers, I want to thank all of you guys for participating, helping to make this a reality. Mike, kudos to you over the last few weeks, helping to get this off the ground. Very much appreciated. Folks, hope you like this episode. Down the road, we will be unveiling future episodes centered around specific OEM technologies and software companies that play a vital role within the secure software factory in the SDLC. And I look forward to those future episodes with those technology companies and the team here. And to learn more about the secure software factory, you can visit DLT.com and go to the application lifecycle domain where there's more information. Additionally, we will post on a follow-up slide at the end here, contact information. If you are interested to learn more about the DLT Secure Software Factory, you can reach out to that email address and you will receive a notification from one of us here. Thank you for the time. Much appreciated. Have a great day and everyone stay safe with the crazy circumstances right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.